In the heart of nowhere, atop a lonely hill, stood an old farmhouse, its weathered facade telling tales of years past. The moon hung low in the night sky, a pale orange flame that cast long, eerie shadows across the landscape. At the foot of the lane, a black sedan sat with its engine off, its occupant, Jackson Lambert, poised in the driver's seat, taking a deep drag from his cigarette. The taste of tobacco lingered in his mouth, a bitter reminder of the weighty task ahead. He had never ventured this far from the city. 3.5 hours downstate felt like a different world entirely. The nearest town, if it could even be categorized as such, was West Knob, its population hardly a blip on the radar at 600 souls. As darkness fully enveloped the land, Jackson crushed the cigarette in the ashtray, the acrid scent mingling with the cool night air. With a deliberate yet swift motion, he donned a pair of blue nitrile gloves and retrieved a Glock pistol from beneath his seat, a cold companion for what was about to unfold. His first encounter with Dorothy Naughton had taken place a month earlier at Talbot's Bar and Grill in Chicago, a dimly lit den where the air was thick with the scent of fried food and spilled beer. Jackson was the kind of man who operated in shadows, reaching out only through layers of connections. Dorothy had approached him with urgency, her voice trembling as she uttered a phrase that set the tone for their dealings. Money is no object. In that moment, he had seen a flicker of desperation in her eyes, a hint of something more than just a simple transaction. Their next meeting had been in the dingy confines of Dante's Motel in Aurora, where Dorothy arrived well prepared. Cash exchanged hands, and she presented photographs of her husband, along with detailed instructions for her plan, a home invasion that would bear the guise of a tragic accident. She assured him that she loved her husband, that this was an act of mercy for a man suffering greatly. Jackson, however, remained ever the professional, reducing her emotional turmoil to nothing more than a narrative he had seen play out countless times before. Now, as he trudged up the lane toward the farmhouse, the isolation wrapped around him like a thick fog, leaving him acutely aware of the silence. The nearest neighbor was miles away, and the only sounds were the crunch of gravel beneath his feet and the rustle of leaves in the wind. The front door yielded easily to his push, just as Dorothy had promised. The interior was shrouded in darkness, yet Jackson navigated the space with the ease of someone who had memorized every detail. He found it strange how sparsely furnished the house was for a woman who claimed wealth was no object. Nevertheless, the cash they exchanged was real, and that was all that mattered to him. Ascending the stairs, Jackson felt the air grow heavy, suffused with a musky odor that assaulted his nostrils, reminiscent of a damp locker room. At the top, the bedroom door stood ajar, and he could hear the labored breaths of Mr. Naughton, each inhale a reminder of the man's frailty. He stepped into the room, greeted by an unearthly glow from the moon streaming through the curtainless windows, illuminating the stark figure of Mr. Naughton, lying bare on the bed. Jackson felt a surge of disgust but no pity for the man. The reality of his task weighed upon him. This was business, devoid of emotion. "Hello, Mr. Naughton," he said, his voice smooth as silk, yet devoid of warmth. The man, lost in a haze of confusion and pain, did not acknowledge him. With steady hands, Jackson raised his weapon and unleashed a flurry of bullets, each shot echoing loudly in the silence of the room. Blood painted the sheets a deep crimson, pooling beneath the man's lifeless form. But as the gunfire subsided, a chill crept over Jackson. He turned to leave, feeling a sense of accomplishment, when suddenly, Mr. Naughton screamed, a terrifying, inhuman wail that reverberated through the walls. Jackson stumbled back, disbelief clawing at his mind as the once lifeless body convulsed, transforming before his very eyes. The man's flesh split grotesquely, a horrific metamorphosis that defied all logic. Panic washed over Jackson as he emptied his gun into the writhing creature, each bullet finding its mark, yet failing to quell the horror that unfolded. With a primal instinct, he bolted for the door, but a misstep sent him tumbling down the stairs. pain exploded in his leg as he landed hard, the sickening crack of bone reverberating in his ears. He looked up to see the abomination that had once been Mr. Naughton, now a monstrous creature, poised to pounce. Thick drool dripped from its elongated jaws as it crept slowly down the stairs, claws clacking ominously on the wood. Just when he thought he had escaped danger, the creature lunged, and Jackson Lambert's screams faded into the night, swallowed by the darkness. Nobody would miss a man like him, a ghost in the world, a name whispered only through a chain of acquaintances. But Dorothy Naughton, in her twisted love, ensured that her husband was cared for, feeding him generously, even as she left to visit her own mother, under the full moon's watchful eye. In the sleepy town of Birch Hollow, most houses whispered their tales, but the one at the end of Weaver Road was shrouded in unsettling silence. It was said that this house wasn't haunted in the traditional sense. Rather, it harbored a presence, something that lingered, something that observed with quiet intensity. The townsfolk called it the night window, a narrow attic window that faced the old highway, its glass as dark as dried ink. Children on bikes would steer clear of the house after sundown, and drivers would share hushed accounts of their headlights illuminating a figure standing still behind the glass, attentively watching as they passed. But the house had been empty for 34 years, until Claire Morgan made it her home. Claire bought the place for a song, a fact that drew knowing glances and subtle shakes of heads at the local gas station whenever she mentioned her address. Yet, she welcomed the isolation, seeking solace after a painful divorce. The house was a sanctuary, offering fresh air and space to think, to heal, and to forget the echoes of her ex-husband's voice that haunted her thoughts like a ghost. Her first night was uneventful, save for the familiar creaks of the old structure and the brush of a cool draft against her ankles. As she unpacked, something scuttled behind the walls. Mice, she assumed. Yet, when she stepped outside for a breath of fresh night air, her gaze instinctively drifted to the attic window, and there, she froze. A tall silhouette loomed within the frame, perfectly still, framed by the silver glow of moonlight. Claire blinked hard, and when she looked again, the window was empty. Great, she muttered to herself, imagining things on night one. But the feeling of being watched lingered, an unsettling presence that clung to her like a shadow. The following day, she casually inquired about the house around town, but every question about the attic was met with averted eyes and nervous laughter. Old Mr. Harland at the hardware store finally spoke up, his voice a hushed whisper. "It ain't the house," he warned. "It's the thing that likes the house." Claire forced a chuckle. "A raccoon?" Mr. Harland leaned closer, his expression grave. "It watches at night. Don't look at that window after dark." Disturbed, but determined not to succumb to superstition, Claire returned home. That resolve lasted until the second night, when she jolted awake at 3:14 a.m., gripped by an irrational certainty that someone stood over her bed. She dared not open her eyes, her heart racing, until finally she summoned the courage to look. There was nothing, save for the attic door at the end of the hall, ajar by an inch, just enough to trigger her fear. She closed it tightly and wedged a chair beneath the handle, a ridiculous gesture that offered little comfort but helped her sleep, if only a little. On the third night, she made the fateful mistake of glancing at the attic window again. This time, something stared back, no mere silhouette, but a face, pale and sinister, pressing close to the glass with a mouth stretched into an unnatural grin. Its eyes were the wrong kind of dark, brimming with a presence that overshadowed the absence of light. Claire stumbled back into the yard, her heart pounding as she fought to catch her breath. The face vanished, but its image was seared into her mind, a brand that ignited her nightmares. Sleep evaded her for the following nights, and by the fifth, she had established a desperate routine. Curtains drawn tight, lamps glowing, music playing softly to drown out the creaks of the house. But no amount of light could erase the truth that each night at precisely 3:14 a.m., The house transformed. The air thickened, shadows stretched, and something stirred in the attic. On the seventh night, Claire broke down. She dialed the sheriff, unloading her fears as if they could be shared and diluted. Sheriff Mullen listened patiently, the weariness in his eyes betraying that he had heard stories like hers too many times before. "I'll come by in the morning," he reassured her. "Stay downstairs. Don't go up there." "Why not?" she pressed, a tremor in her voice. "Because some things don't want to be seen, Claire. And some things don't want you leaving." At precisely 3:14 a.m., the house seemed to inhale deeply, the walls creaking as the attic door cracked open despite the chair barricading it. Claire, trembling, sought refuge behind the couch as soft footfalls echoed down the stairs. Deliberate, curious, almost playful. "I've been alone so long," a whisper floated into the ring, sending chills racing down her spine. "Don't leave me again." Panicked, she squeezed her eyes shut as a cold brush grazed her cheek. With a sudden burst of adrenaline, she bolted upright and ran for the front door, only to collide with Sheriff Mullen, who had arrived just in time to see the attic window above. The dark figure stood there, motionless, observing. Without a beat, Mullen grabbed her arm, urgency cutting through the night. "Don't look at it," he shouted. But she couldn't help it. The face warped into that horrid, too wide smile, and Claire's scream shattered the silence as the house let out a final, shuddering exhale. Mullen dragged her toward his car, but behind them, the attic window shattered outward with a deafening crash. Something slithered onto the roof, unfurling itself in the moonlight. For the first time in 34 years, the night window no longer needed a pane of glass to watch the road. It only needed Claire.